Hey everybody, welcome to the very first podcast slash video stream developer chat log thing that we are doing here today.
That's good.
Yeah, that's exactly how we want to start this, right?
Yeah. Confidence in what it is that we're actually recording is very high.
So I am Marimo.
Yep.
I am the engineer and the narrative director at Three Halves Games. I am working on Sovereignty.
Yeah, I'm Andrew DeBrunkart. I don't know what my dev name
Malpump?
is. It Malthump? Yeah, that's old. That's okay. Whatever. That works. I guess I'm a game design lead type thing,
He
right?
doesn't actually know.
Yeah. If I had it in
We
front
don't
of me, I
actually
would
know
read
what
out
our
the title.
positions are. There's no hierarchy here.
We work.
We work. That's it.
Yep. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of the level design, unit design, all that fun stuff for Sovereignty. Yeah, I mean, how much do you want to go into the November build?
Not that much, honestly.
Okay, cool,
Okay, to
great.
give some context to what happened, we had to release for legal reasons, and that's about as far as I'm going to go on that.
All right, cool.
So it was really a mad rush of what can we do to get something out by like November 4th.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting process because I mean, for me it was a real proof of concept that this was a feasible project and not just like a pipe dream, because we had sat down and up until that point it had been like, well, we'll build up features, we'll build up, like, you were doing a whole bunch of like infrastructural work for the game, right? And then we went, oops, we have to put out something playable in 3 weeks, and we we were able to, like, just the fact that we were able to sit down and go like, well, okay, this is what we can feasibly do in 3 weeks, and prioritize that out, and then like that we had enough infrastructure already in place so we could just go, let's slap the functions together and turn it into something that's, I don't know if I would go so far as to say game, but playable at the very least, right?
So that's actually part of why the map initially was just like that 6x5 square.
Mm-hmm.
No camera motion whatsoever.
Right.
Like we didn't have that ready yet, so it was like, well, if we don't move the camera, maybe there's something we can do here.
Yeah, I remember I was straight up when we looked at like exactly how much, like 6x5 is as much as we could possibly fit on the camera without anything clipping off, and I went, okay, well, that's the room I have to play with. This is how I'm going to cut the space into something that feels like some kind of level flow, right? I actually, weirdly enough, when we started to move on to the real levels, it was harder for me because I didn't have that restriction in place. I guess once you have access to infinite resources, I guess, and you're not working under those restrictions, it's easy to go like, well, why don't I just go a little further this way, or etc.
So like, how did we go from the prototype to those 3 levels we have in the current alpha build that everyone's been enjoying?
So like I mentioned right at the start, it was tricky. Like what I had to do to really start figuring out like what even was a level, I would, before even getting to, because at first I would sit down and I would just try and implement something. I think I even had a build where I started with the pre-alpha test level thing that we put in the November build, and then tried to build that into something real, and it was kind of clunky and messy and wasn't a good process. So I know we sat down, we had a couple of calls where we talked about like, well, okay, like, what are we trying to showcase in the build that's coming up? What kinds of things do like the players need to learn, and what do we have to teach them to be able to functionally play the game, right? Yeah, I actually had to sit down before even touching like Unity at all. It was, well, let's figure out, how do we want this to progress? Do we want like, okay, so we know the first stage is going to just have Baimudan, and we're like, and we don't want to have any of the complex mechanics like the princess passives yet. We know the setting is
We
that
should
it's
talk
going to
about
be.
that later.
We will for sure.
Oh yeah.
We we don't want to have. We know that the setting is just it's her garden and a small group of coffee has come in and we're teaching things like brewing and whatnot. So then that came to okay, well I'll sit down and I'll draw out literally on graph paper like a layout that kind of makes sense for what we're trying to teach here, and then we'll throw that into our engine and then see how it plays. And then most of the time, uh, that level is bad and we change it because I think the very first level 1 that I pushed had like way too many enemies and we didn't have that
It had like twice the number of
it had like twice the
enemies,
number of
right?
enemies, and you actually added the walls around the beginning area. It was blown open on the bottom half
Yeah.
in my first build. Um,
It
so
was
you
very
had
open. It was very hard to tell where should I move
it
Baimuden in the
it
very
totally
first
gave
turn.
you way too many decisions that you could make for your first turn ever playing the game. I think that, but I mean that's it. It's a whole iterative process, right? So it was cool
Yeah,
that we
so
were
I
able
think
to.
it was what was really nice was we put a resource tile right next to Baimuden, and
Mhm.
it's visually distinct enough that you will hover over it. You get this nice tooltip, which was something we were really keen on
Yep.
making sure the tooltips worked and conveyed information. And then most players we've seen play the game would naturally say, "Oh, I'll move Baimuden onto this tile. Oh, and now there are two more resources, right?
Right.
So I'll use her to make one. I'll use the structural brew to make another. Capture those two. Oh, now I can actually branch out a little bit further. And if you play turn one really optimally, you could get almost every single resource on the map turn one. It's kind of ridiculous.
Is that still true?
You could get all but two from
Okay.
what I've been
Yeah,
gotten.
I think the ones off on the right are really
The
tough to get a
bottom
hold
ones
of.
are
Yeah.
you can't, well, no. The ones you can't get are the bottom left and then the top right because all the coffee units are there.
Okay, I'm gonna believe you on that.
Yeah, so let's talk about the second level, which gets a little bit more complicated. Now there are three princesses. Now the princesses give different abilities. We call these internally the princess passives.
Hmm.
I don't think that term is ever used in the game. It probably will be at some
It
point.
should, but we don't
It
call
should
it
be.
that
It's a
anymore.
good name.
It's a good name.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah, so we have these princess passives, and there's a that almost didn't make it into the game. We should probably talk
Yeah,
about that
I
a
would
bit.
love to talk about that.
Go for it.
It was a loose idea that I had because I knew that we were in this weird position where like the game's built around all of these tea princesses, these characters, and while they are like narratively given these distinct characterizations, I really wanted there to be some way that in gameplay they would have unique characterizations between them too. Um, and I think the first iteration, as is true of most things in this game, the first iteration I pitched of what we were going to do for Princess Passives was really bad. It was way too simple and straightforward. I think like we knew off the bat that we wanted Xiao Mei's to be some sort of healing effect. Um, I think like Baimudan's was like +1 attack, and then like uh, I think was Silver Needles just like a raspberry effect? I think it was at one point,
I think it
right?
was just adding like a prickly effect to it.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah,
Um,
not that
so
interesting.
it was boring. It didn't lead to any cool decision making, and like it didn't feel good to play with. And then we hit a point where we talked about it, and we had 2 weeks of meetings where you were like, I'm not sure we're going to even keep these in the game, and I went, hold on, let me touch them again. Give me one shot. We'll come back in a week and we'll see if it's something better. Um, and then that's where we got to the current form of all of them, where uh, the Xiaomei's AoE healing and Silver Needles. I really like the heightened attack, heightened move speed, lowered health combination. Um, and then Baimudan has the something with high health. I can blast it. Um, specialization there.
Yeah, the
Um,
AoE healing was really probably like Showmaze was always the one we liked the most.
yeah, because I really like so so much of the game is built around cool little triggers and interactions like that. And I really like the positional triggers that we got out of just like things like Xiaomei's passive, where the sun's going down, where we you're rewarded not just for like, oh, I brewed a unit that does this specific thing, but for positioning your forces, I guess, in such a way that you can then move in like a scout that's been brewed by Xiaomei and go, oh, well, I've healed everyone back up, so now I have this huge tactical advantage that I didn't have a second ago because I planned to turn ahead, right?
And the
Um,
scout thing was actually really interesting because Drew and myself had a bit of a disagreement on are scouts even worth putting in the game. And I was very strongly like, yes, I want scouts in the game. Drew was not pro scout.
Especially after our November build, I straight up thought that scouts did not make sense here because the differences between them and like a T warrior, for example, a T warrior might get to a resource a turn later, but then it can leave that resource and hit things. That was my perspective at the time. Once we started adding like brewing passives and stuff like that, all of a sudden scouts were crazy cool. And then let alone the fact that in some scenarios you can like say you have Silver Needle brew a scout, and then the scout gets the extra move speed that lets it go to a resource that you wouldn't normally be able to get at that turn. And now you're making a decision between, well, do I want to have an offensive unit, or do I really want to get this resource right now because I'm moving a whole 8 squares, right? Um, Let alone the fact that like you're only going to get one princess passive brew per princess a turn, so that's a huge investment for your turn. Um, yeah, with once more interactions started getting added, then I went, okay, well, having a high movement speed unit is actually really cool, even if they don't have any sort of function
And that's
past
not to
that.
say that
But
with future princess passives that will appear in the game that the scouts are only going to be used for just movement. Like we don't know yet.
there's no again, yeah, you're touching exactly on my point, which is that the cool thing about scouts is how they interact with everything else, not just the fact that they're you know movement oriented. Because if that were the case, our maps would need to be way bigger. Was my initial point in the first place when I was like, we don't need scouts. Um,
Yeah, part of it is that this game, for me, from an engineering gameplay perspective, was very largely inspired by StarCraft, which is a game I love. I
yeah,
love StarCraft. I'm so bad at it.
that's how I feel about RTS games in general. I have a lot of fun with like StarCraft and Warcraft, but whenever I try to play them,
And
like
so much of StarCraft is like, we don't have a fog of war here, which is why scouts in StarCraft or scouting type units in StarCraft are really
useful.
good.
Yep,
But we do have resources, which is pretty
big.
useful still, and
Yep.
scouts help you get to those resources as not necessarily their primary function, but it does
Hmm.
allow you to sort of put them there and say, yeah, I'm gonna like claim this and defend this relative area. If enemies show up, they would have to kill them anyway, so like I would know that they're there.
Right, right.
So just trying to translate. This was originally going to be an RTS,
I was about
like
to say it was.
way early in development.
Hmm.
Uh, there was a prototype, actually.
Oh, I
There
didn't know
was an
that.
RTS version prototype of this game. It worked. It was not fun.
That's the worst, isn't it? When you spend time and build something and you go, well, it plays.
Yeah, but we ended up going with what people typically compare to Fire Emblem,
Yeah,
uh, where this is actually a little more like Advanced Wars. But if you're making a strategy RPG, you live in Fire Emblem's shadow. That's just how it works.
yeah, it's true.
Do you have
Advance Wars
characters?
lives
Do
in
they
Fire Emblem
appear left and
Shadow.
right on the screen? Yeah, it's Fire Emblem. That's
Yep.
how people are going to look at it. It really, though, that was my concern. I didn't want the gameplay to feel like Fire Emblem. And we
Right, and
have
I,
one
I think we do a good job of
huge
distinguishing.
difference in that our units are disposable, dispensable. You
Yeah,
actually want them to die.
I've actually gotten feedback from several people already that uh, coming from a background of just Fire Emblem, that they are hurt by the need to sacrifice their units, I guess would be the way to put it.
We literally named it Sacrificial Tea, to
That
be
is,
honest.
yeah, we do. We have a little guy who's designed to blow up.
Yeah, so with the Princess passives, going back to that and looking specifically at the second level, we wanted to craft the way that enemies appeared in the level to sort of maximize using those passives.
Right.
So we had these over-roasted brutes, which are these big, big enemies that do 10 damage. It's enough to one-shot your princess, which would give you a game over.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Um, yeah, that's pretty bad. But they do 5 damage to themselves right before they start an attack.
Yep. Which I love their design. I love that they're like so muscly and ripped that they injure themselves when they go for a
Yeah,
swing.
there's 2 different ways really to approach that. Really, there's 3, but if you're using the Princess passives, there are 2 different ways. Where you use Baimudens to get the first hit in, which will do a lot of initial damage. That unit will die, but then you get a second unit to do a hit, and at that point, they will be below 5 HP.
Mm-hmm.
So they just die. You hit them once and they die, and then you can move depending on how you brew correctly. So it's possible to get to those raspberries on that map turn 1.
Yeah, you can.
And you don't need that to beat the level. It just makes the level a lot easier.
Yeah, and the idea was generally to have that sort of wall of brutes on that stage be like, oh well, here's where the breaching mechanic comes through the +4 blitz that Vaimudan gives. Although realistically, it turns out that both Vaimudan's and Silver Needle's passives are pretty good at getting through those units.
Mm-hmm. That's where you get to the higher HP units, like the boss in the game.
Yeah.
Where Vaimudan's really starts to shine through.
Yeah, because just having her raw output turn over turn is significantly higher than actually anybody else in the game, under the pretense that whatever she's hitting stays high health for the whole period, which is kind of in contention with itself. It's an interesting little design space that we have to look at. But so long as they're a big tanky...
Some people have questioned like what is the role of her passive, and I think wait until you see some of the later levels that we're already designing, because
That's fair.
The 4th level, I think you're gonna really see where that shines. You're gonna need it. So speaking of that, there's an entire other build of this game coming out in what, like 3 months?
That's the plan. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
How are we gonna do it?
Same as we did this one. I don't know. I've not, like I said when we were just talking about the original build, we spent so much time before we had to release in November just planning like budget and our raw timeline and like just doing the math around what we actually needed to produce, that when it came time to go, okay, well, how are we going to release? We're going to have to do this tiered release thing because we have to release something in November. What's our timeline really going to turn into? What are we going to release when? It was very easy for us to go, well, these are the chunks that we think we can do in 3 months at a time. Maybe move a little bit of prioritization around internally there.
Mm-hmm. So actually, we've already started. Is the answer to how are we possibly, like, there's no way you could just start from scratch here. Right. We already have character mechanics ready. We already have new art in the game. Mm-hmm. And new princesses. Like, we're going from 3 playable princesses to what, like 9 in the next build?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. We haven't even shown all of them. So I actually want to talk about one of my favorites, Genmaicha.
Cool.
So Genmaicha is a character we actually showed already, you know, like way before November even.
Right, that's true.
But the fun thing is she has a unique resource, rice.
Yeah, and by unique...
We should talk about that because that is really different than anything else you've seen.
Yeah, do you want to... I'm not a real tea expert compared to you. Do you want to talk about why there's rice in my drink?
Yeah, because there's rice in the drink. Genmaicha is made with rice.
Okay, fine, that's fair. That's valid. Yeah, no,
you have like puffs of toasted rice, and then you have the tea leaves, and it makes a really delicious earthy drink.
Right. Okay.
So
Cool.
we were thinking when we came up with all of the resources in the game. You've already seen blueberries, raspberries, vanilla. We wanted one completely out of left field resource, and we decided rice was the one. Specifically because Genmaicha was decided as a character.
Right.
And when it comes to making these character decisions, part of the reason Genmaicha was even chosen versus something like Essentia is because Rice can lead to some really weird, interesting mechanics that make gameplay, really unique.
Right. I mean, we intentionally went with Genmaicha because rice is inherently an ingredient that really only works in that tea, right?
Yeah.
You can't you
Can you
can't
imagine making an Earl Grey with rice in it?
with
Like,
rice
that
in it
doesn't
just because
work.
that's all it is. It's just an Earl Grey with rice. It's weird. It doesn't make sense. What's happening? Take it away.
So, how do we
Um,
translate that to a gameplay mechanic?
you're asking the right questions. First off, right off the bat, we wanted to really highlight the uniqueness of the relationship between rice and genmaicha in brewing. Um, so uh, I believe we have it right now that she can use rice as a substitute for tea leaves as part of her passive. On top of that, we also have rice units that exist that are brewable, right? Those are makeable by anyone so long as they have the resources and you've got them in your brew menu, right?
But what's the
Um,
catch?
the catch is they're all really really bad. They are they are either just way too cost inefficient or ridiculously low stats or whatever other negative effects might be applied to them, unless they're brewed specifically by Genmaicha. And then if Genmaicha brews one of these rice units, that's where we get very cool, very unique effects. All of a sudden, we've got this little tiny, expensive, like 1 power, 2 movement dude that you could have made is now stronger. Maybe has a unique action or a unique trigger on it. Um, and that
And we
I
call this rice power.
rice power, is that what we
Rice
call it?
power is what it's called in
We
the
call it
game.
rice power now.
Yeah.
um,
So something that's coming up in this build is status effects. So that's the last key of the puzzle. We had actions in the game,
mhm.
and then we had triggers, or really these are called abilities in the game because I don't like the word trigger, but you
Okay,
know,
sure,
it's confusing for people. So really, you have actions, you have abilities. And the game is more ability focused. You don't have that many actions you can take. You can move and you can attack.
sure.
Every T you can make can do that, except for the Pipsqueak Scout, which can only move, and then
Yep,
the Remedial Chai can heal. And that's all the actions that are available to you. Not that many, but
basically,
it's
yeah.
really the triggers or the abilities where, depending on the game flows, like when they get hit, when they land next to something, when
Yep.
they start the attack, and then the passives add on to that, and that's really the gameplay direction we were going in. So the missing piece of the puzzle was we want to add status effects in this next game. So we have these basic ones, right? We have,
Hmm.
the plant to regen and the equivalent of poison. We don't know what we're going to name that yet.
Yeah.
But then we're like, we could do some like crazy things, and so we can add like rice power.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we had talked about how the way we wanted to implement that was here's the passive effect that unlocks the true potential of a tea, which
Of a
wouldn't mean
rice
any
tea
of a rice tea
specifically.
specifically,
Yeah.
right? Um, the TLDR answer for why we're looking to put status effects in the first place is it gives us sort of long term passive effects that we can apply outside of combat, whereas all of the abilities are internal to combat or I guess internal to taking actions is more accurate. Um,
And also to go talk about all the infrastructural work we have been doing,
sure.
status effects are already in the game.
Yep. Because
Yeah.
you're a superstar.
Well, thank you. But there is one unit currently. It doesn't really showcase it, but you'll know when you see it if you play the alpha build of Sovereignty.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Cool.
we got 3 months I almost said 3 weeks. That would have been scary.
Yeah, I would have flipped.
Yeah, so we got 3 months. We're already making progress on all of the new mechanics we need, and we're looking at all the feedback that has already come in regarding requests or improving communication. We've already
Mm,
put a few patches. We have a few more that we're intending to do, just to make the play as good as possible. We are still in alpha, of course. The next
right.
build is beta. So if you have feedback, absolutely give it because it helps make the game better.
Yeah, I love seeing any and all feedback from whoever. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, we've had feedback as detailed as entire paragraphs about a specific mechanic to somebody just saying, like, boom guy good. And
I
it's
wasn't.
like, we respect all of it.
And yes, boom guy good.
Well, I
That's
think
so
that's all
good.
the time we have for this little podcast. I mean, this is
Oh, are
our
we done?
first one
All
ever.
right.
Yeah, right?
Great.
Like, we've been about half an hour.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we had more on the agenda, but works for me.
I think we covered it, right?
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so look forward to probably in April, where you're going to show some of these new characters that we have talked about, that we have the art for, that we have the mechanics done for,
Yeah.
that you just haven't even seen it yet.
It's all about adding content here. Yeah. There are. Gosh, we'll have to do a dev blog on that at some point, won't we?
That's probably April.
That's probably April. Okay.
Yeah. And ideally April, not the 1st. Otherwise,
Right. Yeah.
So April 2nd, expect to see some devlogs.
Great. Cool.
All right. Until the next time, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah. Loads of fun.